So I think that sensory sensitivities are a really key part of maintaining wellness as an autistic person, but they're also something that doesn't get talked about or kind of advised on a huge amount. So let's start by talking about what we're talking about when we're talking about senses.
When I started working with autistic people, senses weren't even talked about. There was a sensory room maybe, but no one really understood what that was for, or what it was doing, what it was achieving. And now I'm really pleased that we are thinking more about it, but we're still not fully aware of what it is. Even people that have sensory differences might not know what it is they're experiencing and that it is a sensory difference. So when we think of senses, we think of touch, you know, the actual touch of things, how they touch on our bodies, taste, how food tastes, how drink tastes, everything tastes, smell, pretty obvious that one. Sound, so that's noises, big or small, or ones that we think some people can't hear but can be background noises like buzzing and background chatter. And sight, you know, how something looks and how it affects our vision and what we see, whether it's colours or light and dark. So they're the main senses that we think about when we're looking at sensory differences or sensory sensitivities, or it's basically our experience of the world. It's how we take it in.
As well as the more obvious senses, which you kind of helpfully listed us through, there are some lesser known sensory sensitivities that people can experience, and I find them really fascinating to talk about. So let's do that. We're talking about proprioception, interoception, and the vestibular system. So let's start with proprioception, because I always get proprioception and the vestibular system mixed up because they are kind of connected.
They're interlocked, and actually, Ella, to be honest, it's good that you said that, because the thing is, if someone has sensory differences or sensitivities or likes the senses, seeks the senses, they can cross over. No one has one thing, like you said, they're all different.
We haven't said what proprioception is.
It's kind of the feedback we get from moving our body against something or on something.
So that's proprioception. And the vestibular system, I always like to think of as like a little pilot in my ear.
Like guiding you.
Guidance. It's kind of like a guidance system. Isn't it part of your inner ear?
What I understand it is where you understand where you're standing, where you are in the world. And actually that can lead to kind of your sense of what you're doing. So it is like that. It's like why do I move over here? I want to move over here. And that's where it leads into people struggling with things like sport. So a young person might just say they don't want to do sport, and the understanding of that is so different to what is actually going on. And it's actually a difficulty with I got terrible spatial awareness anyway, but it's that kind of like idea of not knowing where you are in the world.
Yeah, I think that's really true. So my eldest child is a dancer.
Okay.
And when I go and watch her dance classes, the rest of the group are able to stay in their spaces in the room, and she's kind of bashing into everyone here, there and everywhere. And that would be because of the vestibular system being not quite performing how it should, right?
And you can see like how that could also get people into trouble as well without meaning to. It looks like you're not kind of being polite, and it's actually just part of that system that you're struggling to control or understand.
So would that impact that thing where often autistic people are told that they're standing too close or not, like getting that distance between you and the person that you're with?
Absolutely, that personal space thing.
And then the really interesting and most recently talked about sense is obviously interoception.
Yeah, my favourite.
Yeah, it's my favourite too. It's really fascinating, isn't it? So would you mind just explaining what interoception is?
So my understanding of it is that it's the internal senses, actually. It's what we're feeling inside. So, you know, I work with a lot of people that don't know when they're hungry or when they're thirsty or when they're in pain even. Mm-hmm. And you can see how that can affect so many areas of life and start to cross over into other challenges and difficulties, eating, drinking.
And another thing that I experience with interoception is I really, really don't like being cold. And if I get cold, I really can't cope and I get really, really upset. So I always wear a lot of different, sort of a top tip really, I always wear a lot of different layers so that I can be at the temperature that I need to be.
That's a really good tip, actually. Yeah, temperature is a huge thing as well. With all the senses we've touched upon, the guilt or the shame or being kind of so self-aware of yourself because you're going through them and experiencing the world in a different way can then, lead into other difficulties with social interactions and work and education, especially if people don't understand them.
Yeah,
around you.
so like if someone's in an office place where they're being expected to wear, you know, a shirt, a tie, and a jacket, maybe a lot of autistic people, because of interoception, find it really unbearable to overheat, and probably wouldn't be able to do a job as efficiently if they weren't able to regulate their temperature because of restrictions around clothing and stuff like that.
Absolutely. So how about you say you can wear what you want to wear, because if you're going to do the job and you're going to be more comfortable. I worked with a young woman that in the end, she was actually a film editor, but she was made to then work in a kind of almost like hot desking suite situation, and it just became unbearable because you know, we talked about sight. Well, one of the things is sensitivity to lights, and you know, those strip lights where they just slightly do that. It meant she could not complete her work, and there was a buzzing from them as well. Nobody else noticed it, and because nobody else noticed it, it wasn't real. And that's another thing I think that we don't do well enough of, is if we don't experience the world like that, then it can't be happening.
There are times, aren't there, in our life, particularly for people who are assigned female at birth, there are certain points in our lives where those sensory sensitivities can be extra challenging. So I'm like currently in that perimenopausal period, which we never talk about. I'm even like, am I allowed to talk about that? Yeah, we never talk about that. And I've also, you know, obviously I've been through puberty, and I've also had 3 pregnancies and 3 births. And those are times, are there times, I mean, I'm not male, so I don't know what kind of stuff would be impacting.
Well, males can be hormonal too, and puberty with males and females.
Puberty, and they do have like a monthly cycle as well, don't they?
Yeah.
Hormonally, men. And so there are times, like I notice at certain points in the month that my sensory sensitivities feel like they've been turned up to 10.
Someone turned up the volume on all of them. I don't know what your experiences have been, Ella, but I've have a lot of young girls and females that can't go to work or school for that week every month, and some of them now have taken medication to cease periods altogether because they cannot handle the sensory overload. And the impact on health, but also the impact on how you feel about yourself, it's so confusing. And we don't talk about that enough. I mean, periods are not a pleasant experience anyway, but if you've got the sensories going through the roof and you just want to lie in bed and not talk to anyone in a darkened room for a week, you think, I had a 14-year-old girl that just stopped going to school for that week every month, and she was trying to kind of work towards her GCSEs and exams, and so the impact on education and then the social impact, it's just...
I mean, it could ultimately cost people their kind of careers
Absolutely.
in the end, couldn't it? And I think, I mean, I think for me, starting to think about that happened when I was working with a group of autistic women on a project, and we were sort of talking about periods, just as you do on the lunch break or whatever, and people started talking about the products that they used, and, you know, particular brands of reusable pads and stuff that were more soft. And I think it would be actually... that's one of the useful things about having other autistic people in your life, is that you can share those kinds of things, because even where we don't talk about periods with our neurotypical friends because it's just an awkward topic, there's like an extra level of nuance when you're autistic that is the kind of conversation you want to have with your friends.
You
really
need it.
of
You
like,
need those tips
what have you tried?
And the more comfortable you can feel, the more likely, again, like we were saying before, be empowered. Make those decisions for yourself. Know that that is going to help you.
And the products that are available now have developed so much. So there's so much available that makes it more comfortable. And so I think, but I can't imagine in a scenario where someone was missing school, as you've mentioned, because of that. I can't imagine a scenario in which the staff kind of go, right, well, let's think about what we could actually do to make this person more comfortable, what products are available. But that is sensory needs.
Yeah, and that's an adjustment. And maybe it's that they understand the cycle. In those days, maybe the person does extra hours other times in the month if they're willing, or works from home, has shorter hours. There are things that you can do to get the most out of somebody. And I just don't think people are, like employers, general communities are not doing enough to understand the sensory differences and the impact. And like you said at the beginning, the wellness.
A really good bit of advice that I would give to adults in the situation where they're like, well, I don't know what my sensory sensitivities are and I don't know how to start to work with that, would be to maybe keep a journal of like when you're having anxiety and when you're having overload or meltdowns or shutdowns, and what was happening at the time, to see if you can find, like playing detective, isn't it? To see if you can find any links there.
100%. And the thing is, what really gets to me, and what my job when I've got my assessment hat on, I do other things, but when I'm doing assessments, I try to do very thorough, very, sometimes takes a long time, which can be frustrating, but I think we're not going to get enough in an hour's observation or an hour's chat, especially like you said, when someone doesn't know actually what it is. It's actually my job to help be detective and help understand and help know what those are, and actually just saying, like, what's it like when you drive in the car? What do you feel? What's it like when you walk to school? What's it like, or like with adults, what's it like when you meet someone in a pub for a drink, or you have to go and meet someone in a pub? What's happening to you before you go there? Because I think that affects the sensory differences affect those interactions so much.
What I would say, like, if you're like, okay, I go into a workplace or I'm at home, how do I know where to start? I would say keep that journal like I mentioned, but then at the same time maybe actually go into your house or into your workplace as if you've never been there before and look around.
Observe it. Yeah, interestingly, I worked with another woman that was through her pregnancy, and the way she was treated at the maternity unit, because she asked to see where she was going to give birth first, because she wanted to smell it, she wanted to get the lights, she wanted to, and they just wouldn't let her see it because it's a busy unit, and they're like, they just kind of made her feel like a panicky first-time mum. And actually she was autistic and she had a number of sensory differences. And so they made what was already quite, a challenging situation for anyone much, much worse.
Than it
so
needed
she's
to
trying,
be.
yeah.
I think what really strikes me as important to say as part of this is that everything that we're talking about when we're talking about sensory accommodations, like getting rid of those awful strip lights and keeping temperatures comfortable, would make life better for everyone.
Well,
so, for example, major supermarkets often have autism hours, don't they, where they turn down the lights and they turn down the music and they get rid of big signs.
And no intercom.
Why does that have to be an autism hour? Does anybody enjoy going to the supermarket and having bright lights and loud noise
I
played
go
at
on a
them?
Saturday night sometimes because it's quieter and it's less intense, because it's
So actually everyone would benefit, apart from capitalism. Capitalism wouldn't benefit. But everybody would benefit if we just did some of this stuff as the way that society worked. And that is the problem. The problem is that this was all designed without autistic people in mind, but the changes that we're asking for would positively impact everybody. So for now, we're left kind of playing detective and figuring out our own sensory needs. But in the long run, it would be great if the world just became a more sensory-friendly place.
I think we'd find a lot more productivity and happiness.
Yeah. So my understanding is that when it comes to our sensory sensitivities, we can either be hypo or undersensitive, or hyper or oversensitive. Can you explain that for me?
Yeah, so what the interesting thing with all the senses that we've talked about, there is these two sides to all of them. And I think what we see more easily is over. And I don't like the term oversensitive or hypersensitive because it does sound a bit judgy. It's like, don't be so oversensitive. But actually what it is explaining is that someone's kind of very, very sensitive to that sense. So let's take noise. It's the loud noises. So quite commonly, neurodivergent people do not like sounds of hand dryers or vacuum cleaners or blenders, but they also could be undersensitive. But sometimes the complication is that something that we assume it's an oversensitivity and it actually could be an undersensitivity. So let's take somebody that has earphones on when they're on the tube or in class, but actually they might actually be blaring really loud music into their own ears to block out everybody else, but people will assume it's because they don't like any sound at all. So those are the things where we have to really understand what is oversensitivity and what's undersensitivity. What we've done for a long time is that only really looked at sensory avoidant. That's the kind of thing that I think a lot of clinicians have probably fallen foul of, is to be like, okay, do they hate noise? Do they hate light? Do they hate crowds? Yeah, that is relevant. But the seeking is really, really interesting, and it can be done in ways that we probably wouldn't always see or observe. It can be quite subtle, or it can be done in a way that looks like something else. So someone that maybe lies against the wall with their legs up against the wall and strokes their feet, I think a lot of people might say, oh, they just like the touch of the wallpaper, but they might also be getting some proprioception with the stretch and some pressure against the wall and their back against the wall. So from
It
that
might
one,
smell nice down there.
exactly, nice carpet, nice floor. So from that one incidence, we can get a lot of rich information and like understand someone a lot better.
Just for people who might be like, right, okay, what can I actually grab hold of and try right now? Could you maybe give me, say, 3 things that might help if you're feeling oversensitive and 3 things that might help if you're feeling undersensitive to a stimulus?
I have quite a lot of young people, particularly actually those assigned female at birth, who struggle with eating. and textures of eating, the sounds of eating, and it stops them from doing what we call group eating, which is eating in a canteen, eating with your family. So what I've suggested, one is that she wears noise-cancelling headphones, but what they don't understand is actually it's because she prefers the sound of her own eating, the chewing, likes to feel it. It actually comforts her. But it's not actually as simple as blocking out the sounds of other people. So that's one thing where it can cross over. I think oversensitive as well, clothes is a huge part of it. Some people like tight clothes. They like the pressure, so they'll wear really tight jeans, really tight leggings, tight tops, which sometimes might not always be appropriate, but it makes them feel more comfortable. And then you have people that can't stand labels, can't stand the tops of socks, so you have to cut all those off. So simple things that can be done at home that very day that you realise that's one of the differences. Go and cut everything up. Go and make it work for you. Get bigger clothes, get smaller clothes. I think also, so sight's an interesting one. I think colours can really instigate a sensory difference, both over and under. So I think some people I know wear sunglasses when they're out and about, or sunglasses all the time, or have glasses that change when they go into darker places or lighter places. I think that's a really good way that you can control your environment if it's an ever-changing environment. I think you can also, if you're at school or in a workplace, you can ask people to turn off the strip lighting, change the lighting somehow, because in that you'll both have the buzzing of the lights and those terrible flickering lights. So there are ways we can control. Some glasses as well would help with those lights, actually can sort of diminish that, or you can be moved to a room where you just don't have those lights.
I think that's really great, actually, that what you're saying is not, I think often when people get an autism diagnosis, they feel like they've got to go out and buy a bunch of specific, expensive sensory equipment, and everything that you've suggested is stuff that can be done or adapted from things you already have. I think that's really helpful. Thank you. So if you've got any advice for kind of equipment or different strategies to use when you're looking to implement a sensory diet or sensory accommodations in your life?
I think sensory differences are behind a lot of the challenges that neurodivergent people face every day. And I don't think we've been doing enough from the clinical side, the assessment side, to get to grips with that. Mm-hmm. Because in my limited experience, I guess, but I think that if we can accommodate, like you say, and adjust and equip people to understand what it is for them, then that will then lead into decreasing anxieties about going to work or going to school. I would get them to write things down, like a diary, or it could be lists. It doesn't have to be fluent, it doesn't have to be articulate, it can be thoughts, it can be noticing that you find meal times really stressful with your family, so it's stopping you eating with your family. I would ask them to collect those thoughts over a period of a week in different scenarios, being in the car, going to school, going to work. And then I would look at that, and it's like detective work. It's like, okay, so did you notice that after you had that meal, you were kind of very stressed, or you were upset, or you fell out with your mum, or you fell out with your partner? And now slowly we can start to build up a real understanding of that. If you find it easier, it kind of distracts you to fiddle with things in your hand. I have some younger women that don't want people to know, so they try and hide it. So I suggest put things in their pockets or put things under their jumpers or in their jackets that they can just play with, so that kind of it alleviates if they have to sit in a situation where they have to concentrate for a while.
Yeah, I think when I'm looking at accommodating my sensory needs, I kind of break it down into two parts. So there's like the stuff that you do to mitigate the sensory experiences you have in the world, and that's stuff like fiddle toys to concentrate, headphones, weighted blankets. And then there's stuff that I like to do every single day so that I'm staying regulated, which I think is referred to by professionals as a sensory diet. So even when I'm feeling okay, I'm still making sure that I do these things that are for my sensory needs, which is part of how I stay well. And I think often the mistake that's made is that people respond to sensory needs rather than having an ongoing input that means that they are staying well generally. So being proactive, I guess, rather than reactive.
Absolutely. And that's the thing I think I've learned as opened my mind, is that you can do an assessment one week and you're like, okay, I've got it. This is what's the triggering. This is what they like. And it's totally different the following week, because it does change every day. And then we have to accommodate to that, and we have to understand it's an evolving process, because something that could be really comforting one week suddenly becomes quite discomforting and upsetting. And I think a key thing is the predictability as well. If you know what's coming, if you know that in an hour's time you get to go and sit somewhere on your own for an hour, I think that's really helpful.
So if you found this video helpful, please like the video, consider subscribing to the channel, and check out the description box for more information.